Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for being here for um, our long-term flood recovery calls. My name is Emily Schaefer, and I'm the Director of Development for the Midland Area Community Foundation. And it's a privilege to be able to be here and be with my friends who are out serving our flood survivors in the community. And I'm excited about today's presentation. These calls are done in conjunction with the Long-Term Disaster Recovery Group, which is a big collaboration of a lot of community partners, and some of which are on the call here today. But just wanted to go through a couple of other details with you before we start the presentation. As a reminder, these calls are being recorded, and we have the recordings actually on the midlandfoundation.org website or the reliefmidland.org website. And to date, this is actually our 17th Zoom call that we've had. And these calls are really to serve as a way to bring light to different topics and questions that we've heard come up throughout the community and throughout the process of long-term flood recovery, and also give a space for questions and answers too. And our hopes is that, this will really be an informative session and allow you to ask questions as we progress here. Some housekeeping notes. Like I said, it's being recorded, so if you don't want to be a part of the recording, now is your time to jump off. We ask that if you do have questions that you put them into the chat box, which I've already typed a little message on there, so hopefully it's popped up. But we will have time at the end too, if you want to unmute yourself and ask the question yourself versus typing it in. But we'll have some time at the end for Q&A. And like I said, the recordings can be found on the Midland Foundation website and also the Relief Midland website. We've had a variety of different topics covered throughout. This is over a year now that we've been doing these calls. So we've talked with FEMA at the beginning. We had city and county housing officials talk to us about the needs and the requirements that were out there. Our last call was about the infrastructure group with the Midland Business Alliance. We've had the Four Lakes Task Force be a part of these calls. And so I definitely encourage you to check out the previous calls to see the different topics that were discussed. And as always, don't hesitate to reach out to myself or really anyone that's on the call today as part of the presenters with any questions that you have. But without further ado, I'd like to talk about what we're going to be talking about today. So I have the privilege of serving on the one of the subcommittees for long-term disaster recovery, and that committee is for volunteering. And so there's very much still a need for volunteers in this time. And we wanted to use this call, to talk about what we've seen at the start of the flood and what was needed at the beginning, where we're at right now, and what do we see as the future of volunteering in long-term flood recovery. And then, like I said, we'll have some time to have some questions and answers. But I wanted to introduce my friends and colleagues, Eric Ostrander and Bree Sklar. So Eric joined the volunteer committee for long-term disaster recovery, probably about 3-4 months ago. And Eric serves as the construction coordinator for long-term disaster flood recovery. And he also has construction really in his blood because he's the construction manager for the Habitat for Humanity. So he lives and breathes construction and really has a heart for plugging people into where they are most passionate about serving and making it really, really easy to understand. And so it's been a joy and a privilege to get to know Eric on the committee, and I'm excited for what he has to share and how he can encourage us to all just step out and jump into the work. So thanks for being here, Eric.
Thank you.
And then we have my friend Bree. So I've known Bree now for over a year because Bree really was hired at United Way of Midland County as a result of the flood, and she was in the muck right at the onset. And so it's really been sweet to get to know her both personally and then through, professionally through all the things that she's doing for volunteering for flood recovery. So she's really the very the CEO, if you will, of volunteering for flood recovery. And so she's going to provide just a depth of knowledge of, like I said, past, present, and future volunteering needs. So thank you, Bree, for being here and making the time too. And I'll toss it over to you now, Bree.
Great, thank you so much, Emily. I'm super excited to be here and talk to you guys about volunteerism. It's something that I am obviously incredibly passionate about. It's been such an honor and privilege to watch this community really show up in terms of volunteerism this past year. This is completely new arena for me. I am traditionally a banker, so to be able to really engage in the community with such a hands-on approach has been very life-changing for me, which speaks to what volunteerism as an individual can do for people as well. So here are just a few photos highlighting the flood that happened May 2020. And it really just raged through our neighborhoods, as you can see in these images here. Nearly 4,000 homes were impacted in Midland County alone. 155 of them were deemed destroyed by FEMA, and 589 were majorly impacted. So if you look at these images and you think about those numbers, we have to really start thinking strategically about how we can help these homeowners get back to a safe, warm spot, and how can we do that in a way that is economical and can really leverage the dollars that were provided both by FEMA and by our community donors. Because realistically, that's nearly 1,000 people that would need direct support, and that doesn't come at a small price. And I think that's where volunteerism can really help with leveraging those dollars. We were really blessed to witness firsthand a community that loves each other and shows up well when we need it most. Because we just had an outpouring of love and support right away from our community members showing up to kind of help with the mitigation pieces. Next slide, please. So disaster recovery is a very long process. It takes time, it takes collaboration. It's not something that any one person or organization can do on their own. When you're looking at flood recovery as a whole, we really go through 3 stages. And that first stage is the emergency response, providing for those medical needs, shelter, food, water, making sure that everybody's safe. Those were left up to the professionals. That's when we called in the National Guard and things like that, just to make sure that we were being very intentional with how we were ensuring the safety of our community. And we move into phase 2, which is the relief stage. And that's really where you start to see our community show up and how our community was able to be involved with some of those immediate response needs. That's with doing muck outs and demos, getting our VOAD groups here in place to assist with those types of tasks, data collection, really getting a grasp on what the impact was of these floodwaters, so we can start to visualize and think of what a plan is. There's no way we would have been able to do that as effectively as we have been today without the assistance of our volunteers right from the beginning. And then the third and final stage is the long-term recovery stage. And that's where you're looking at that collaborative and systematic structure that helps us build a long-term strategy so that we're making sure we're being intentional with the dollars that were both donated and received by FEMA, in-kind materials, and looking at how we can leverage volunteerism to make sure we're really stretching those dollars and impacting as many homes as we can to make sure that everybody is in a warm, safe space. Next slide, please. Perfect. So the work of volunteers, what does that look like? What have we been doing? This is the really fun stuff for me because we have been incredibly busy. We talked about some of those immediate needs. Right away, our community set up distribution centers throughout the footprint to make sure that they were easily accessible. Those were 100% ran from volunteers, and they were 100% fueled by in-kind donations, which was just very moving to watch. We also had damage assessments, surveys go out, and as far as door-to-door knocking with information kits to make sure everybody knew how to get connected with FEMA and how to get connected with our local resources that are available to assist. Recognizing that door-to-door piece was incredibly important because mailing systems were not normalized again yet. Not everybody had access to electricity, much less social media or some of the more popular media outlets. So doing that door-to-door information kits, hand delivered nearly 4,000 kits with the help of volunteers. Then you start to phase into the support system. So what can we do for our community while they're going through their recovery, while they're even trying to wrap their head around what their recovery is going to look like? That's when we really start to look at our partnership with our case managers. So they allow us to stay connected with the homeowners directly, so we are aware of their most immediate unmet needs and what their long-term needs are as well for our flood survivors. So with the support system, we connected with care partners. So that's more on an emotional support level, not to replace mental health, but really to just do pulse checks, make sure that our flood survivors are recovering or their recovery is progressing in terms of both emotional and physical stability. Hot meal deliveries to those that are unable to prepare hot meals for themselves because they don't have a kitchen. Those were some things in the early stages that were put in as a long-term structure that we are still continuing to this day. Then we start looking at a partnership with St. Vincent de Paul with a home in a box kit. And really the intent of that was to anticipate some of those very basic needs to help a house feel like home when a survivor is able to return to their new space. The great part about that, all of these items were brand new. These were funded by our donors, but also this is 100% driven by volunteers. Volunteers that have come in to help with warehouse management, help organize and structure all of these basic furnishings like beds, couches, dinette sets. But volunteers also hand deliver these home in a box kits and assemble them, which has been incredibly meaningful. A lot of times we hear homeowners say, oh, it's okay, we can do it ourselves. We can put a dinette set together. But then after you talk to them a little bit and help them understand, yes, you can do it on your own, but you don't have to. And people are here willing to help you. You kind of start to see that sense of relief and that trust being built when they say, you're right, I don't have to do this by myself, and please show up and let's get this done together. And that leads really nicely into partnerships. We could not do this without partnerships of so many giving agencies in this area, churches, clubs. I mentioned St. Vincent de Paul. They're a national organization that have been doing the Home in a Box program since Hurricane Katrina. VOADs, and our local businesses. All of these different community members routinely show up to help make sure that our flood survivors are being supported, and I couldn't be more grateful. So when we start looking at volunteer engagement, how are we going to stay up to date with the most relevant needs in our community, and how are we going to advocate and recruit? This has been probably one of the biggest challenges for us, because flood recovery is not fluid. It's an incredibly dynamic process, and there's only so much that you can anticipate. And one tiny thing can completely shift the needs of the homeowner in terms of what their construction rebuild looks like. We just had tornadoes. We've had a lot of aggressive storms that start to help or have homeowners feel like they're back at square one. And these are all things that we have to regularly keep our pulse on, finger on the pulse on, so that we can be sure that when we're reaching out to our survivors, that we are truly making an impact and we're providing relevant help. We do this through routine check-ins. We have, as Emily mentioned earlier, an engagement committee. We meet bi-weekly to discuss things that we're hearing and seeing. This committee is made up of so many wonderful community members, churches, clubs, businesses that can kind of give their feedback on how they can show up for the community, but also what they're hearing, what the needs are. And this is all done in collaboration with our case managers. So that's really this really nice networking that we have going on. It's also really important through this process for us to be monitoring volunteer fatigue. So by having these open communications, we're able to see what volunteer groups need additional support, which ones need a break, and what homeowners may not have been receiving any support that they may benefit from volunteerism. We do all of this while keeping our COVID safety in mind. Very much following all of the recommended guidelines being set forth by the health department. We keep groups healthy and safe. That is our number one priority. And we reassess that daily to see what the needs are and how we can continue to have no COVID cases in all of our volunteer engagement endeavors, which has been a huge success for us. We move to the rebuild piece, and this is really projects that partnered with our construction managers at UMCOR and with Habitat, which you'll hear from Eric a little bit more on later. But really those types of projects, we're looking at painting, insulation, landscaping. The biggest part, I would say, is that that's where I get a lot of my information from in terms of where the flood survivor is physically at in their rebuild, and when is a good time for volunteers to be engaged. Because realistically, the rebuild of somebody's home can take months, hopefully not over a year, but there are instances where that can happen. So how do we know when are they ready to paint? When are we going to be able to come in and help? By making those partnerships with our rebuild partners, we're able to know with a pretty good idea when that need's going to come in and when we can start advocating and recruiting. Lastly, we have community impact. Those types of projects are more on a larger scale. It's not necessarily designed for one individual home as much as it's designed for the community at large. So we've done debris removal projects in partnership with Dow Pulling Our Weight event. That's where you see a lot of those heavy items being pulled out, thrown in dumpsters, the heavy machinery and equipment out. We've done our first lake bed cleanup just recently at the end of summer here, and we're targeting another one for late spring. That's getting all the docks and larger items that are still in the bottom of the lake bed removed, so that when we do rebuild the lakes, we'll be prepared and ready to rock with that. We do have a Gladwin water distribution. So one thing I haven't mentioned is that we do have a regional scope now. So originally, with me being United Way of Midland County, the original focus was Midland County and singularly. But as we started to recognize the regional need, that's transitioned to more of a regional scope now. We make sure that we're getting that volunteer support across the regional footprint. And one of the ways that we do that is with the Gladwin water distribution. So their water tables have drastically dropped. They're having well issues still to this day, and we want to make sure that cases of water are delivered to those at no charge to anybody that are still struggling with water issues and do not have a way to get water on their own. We also have fall cleanup events that are targeted to remove some more of the natural debris, trees, logs, things like that, that as a result of the flood. We do this with partnerships of local landscaping companies, and they come out and they really advocate for their community. They bring all of their tools and equipment, and they train hands-on directly with the volunteers to make sure that they know what type of equipment they should be using and how they can best partner together to make sure that these more residential areas are being cleaned up properly. Next slide, please. So this slide is really great because you can see a lot of our volunteers hard at work in the early stages. And there's a lot of really great key points called out here in the bottom corner. So we've had over $1.5 million worth of in-kind donated materials that were distributed through our 8 distribution centers. And we still house some of these in-kind materials to this day. These materials are more relevant construction materials like siding, drywall, insulation. We partner with our case managers and our construction managers to assess when a homeowner is ready for these materials and to make sure that they have proper ways to put these items up, so that we're being good stewards, but also so that the homeowners don't have an additional burden of housing these materials while they're still trying to figure out all of these other mechanics of what their recovery looks like. To date, we've had over 31,000 volunteer hours recorded since the flood, which has saved our community $860,000, which is completely amazing. Though, if you think about those dollars saved just through volunteerism, those are dollars that we were then able to use to help rebuild homes. We wouldn't have been able to really do that without volunteers. We would have had to, pay contractors or pay landscapers or pay out of pocket for some of these items. That's a really big impact number. And then these are additional funds that were raised by donors that were granted by FEMA. And then regionally, FEMA has followed through with $46 million, which is amazing. Next slide. This is another really great slide that gives a really nice imagery at volunteers at work. You can see some of these volunteers helping organize the warehouse with the home in a box kits. You have mattresses and comforters and dinette sets in that. Then you move over to seeing some volunteers help with some of the heavy debris removal. We partnered with local agencies to help with some of our habitat rebuild. So this is TCF Bank helping with Eric and Habitat doing some painting. We have volunteers doing hot meal deliveries at our folks staying at a hotel. And volunteers assembling a home in a box kit and help putting those dressers together. I can't say enough about the good work of our community and the partnerships that we've had. Some organizations like Memorial Presbyterian, Messiah Lutheran, they are engaged regularly and are continuously showing up in ways that are still baffle me to this day. We work with Dow, Trinzio, TCF frequently. They help fill some of these larger hands-on projects. And even Stephen's ministry, who helps with our care partner network to walk alongside our flood survivors on a volunteer aspect, emotionally, to make sure that they're receiving that emotional support that they need. We still recruit VOADs from out of the region. So we've had groups like No Dirt in Sutton's Bay, UMC show up for us. And we have the Veterans Coalition that helps directly with veterans that are struggling with their flood recovery as well. Next slide. It looks like we're up for questions. I know that was kind of, might feel like drinking out of a fire hose, but that just is a testimony to the great work that our community is doing. And I love having things to talk about because that means that we're busy and we're making an impact. So thank you everybody for the listen. So we might have some questions in the chat.
Yep. Bree, one of the questions was, how much does the home in a box cost each of the homeowners?
So it doesn't cost the homeowners anything, which is phenomenal. The value of it is about $3,000. We received them at a discount through our partnerships with St. Vincent de Paul. And it was paid for and provided by our generous donors. But these home in a box kits come with mattresses to accommodate the size of their family, dressers, kitchenette sets, really all of those basic essential needs that you could think you would want or need when you're first moving back into a space. Good question.
And Bree, are there still some available if flood survivors have a need, or what's the process for that? If someone says, hey, yeah, I want to, I'm interested in learning more about how to get one of those or how to support that financially.
Great question. So we do still have home in a box kits available. If we learn of a community member that needs one, we just get them connected with a disaster case manager, and they can do some intake information and help make sure that when they're ready for it, we can get it to them in a timely manner.
Thanks, Bree. And yeah, just a heads up for everyone, the disaster case managers are really kind of the folks who walk with our flood survivors during the time, and then they help bring different needs to, just like there's a volunteer committee, there's a financial disbursement committee that really looks at both of the Community Foundation funds, United Way funds, and fills needs that come up that the case managers bring to that funding table. And the number to reach the disaster case managers is 989-374-8000. Again, it's 989-374-8000. And we encourage you, like Bree just said, if you know of somebody or you have got a neighbor that maybe is interested in learning more, feel free to call that number and ask them some of those specific questions too, in regards to different things that they can help with from a financial standpoint. And then I know Richard also asked about funding from the state. And I don't believe, I know the Community Foundation, and I don't believe United Way of Midland County has received any of the state dollars. I think the dollars that FEMA and the state dollars are going directly to the different places that have been assigned. Bree, any other touch points with that would be helpful to know?
Yeah, actually, I think one thing that it might help fill the knowledge gap on that is the case managers work directly with the homeowners and pull together all of their financial resources. So they'll look at what they've received from the state, from insurance, from FEMA, SBA. And then what our group does is we come in and we say, okay, so what need exists after all of these other funding sources have come through for you? And so it's really more of like a gap funding, because we recognize that FEMA, though their $33,000 is incredibly generous, that's not going to fully recover some of these folks that lost their entire home. So how are we going to help make sure that they're warm and safe? And that's where we come in. And we really lean into our case managers to look at that financial analysis piece, and any dollars, whether they be state or federal, they'd be assessed at that time. But Emily, that's a really good point. None of our agencies, as standalone agencies, are receiving those funding dollars.
Thanks, Bree. And then another question that came up too about the home in a box. Did we ever consider the kitchen in a box? It sounds like this individual has specific knowledge about St. Vincent de Paul and some of the things that they're doing.
They might be the same thing, just under different verbiage, because the home in a box kit does come with pots, pans, dishes, towels, things like that. There's a kitchenette set. So you get some basic kitchen needs, you get some basic bathroom needs, you get your basic linen needs, and your most standard furniture needs met.
Okay. And then, like you said, we do still have some of those kits available, right? And so if someone wanted to give specifically to that, they could give essentially to either one of the funds, the Community Foundation Relief Fund or the United Way's Rising Strong Fund, and designate that towards it. But I know we still have some kits available, so that's great to hear.
Perfect.
One other general volunteer question that came up is just regarding the summer, if we have seen an uptick, or what kind of hours have we seen in regards to volunteers this summer, and have they been consistent?
So volunteerism in general does tend to be more aggressive when the weather is nice, both from a time management perspective and the types of projects that we're out doing make more sense when the weather's nice. I would say overall, though, we've been staying pretty consistent. We have our larger events, which obviously make our numbers jump up quite a bit. If you look at us having an event that hosts 300 people over the course of a couple of days, that's going to boost our numbers. But at the same token, I don't want to take away from some of the small pockets of volunteers that we have out on a regular basis. Because although those big events are really great and they are incredibly helpful, sometimes you only need 5 volunteers to help finish paint a house, and it'll only takes a couple hours and it's done. But the impact of that is really meaningful. And I'll pause on that topic just a little bit, because Eric will have so much more fun things to say. But when you think about how volunteerism ebb and flows, yes, in the summertime, volunteers traditionally like to be out a little bit more when the weather's nice.
Thanks, Bree, and great segue. So Eric, you want to share a little bit more with us about what you are seeing out there and where people can plug in?
Absolutely. Bree, you make a hard act to follow. That was a great presentation. So as Emily said, a little more background on myself. So I am the construction manager for Midland County Habitat for Humanity. I originally got involved with the long-term flood recovery team through a partnership with United Way and the Stand Together Fund, but also I was part of the long-term flood recovery construction committee. I was just there giving information. We were trying to all work together to find gift in kinds or how could we save money for these homeowners, what was going to spread the donated dollar as far through the community and as far out for these affected families as we possibly could. So it was my original part in being involved. We did do a couple of homes with the Stand Together that were totally destroyed. One of them was basically down to the frame and gutted out. We had Bree helped us find volunteers because at that time, and I'm really glad, Bree, you brought up the COVID conversation. At that time, we couldn't identify volunteers through Habitat for Humanity. It was brought down by Habitat International. So we were partnering with United Way to help them in flood recovery. And Bree was the one that was helping us find our volunteers. Again, as she mentioned, every day on site, we constantly are monitoring what is going on in the community, what is are there state mandates, what's MyOSHA bringing down, and we as a term, pivot from that point quite often to make sure that we're keeping people on site as safe as possible. Because if you're not, people don't want to volunteer that don't feel safe. So we're always trying to make sure the protocols of hand sanitizer, hand wash stations, all those things, tools being cleaned, whatever is constantly being followed and monitored. So I was really glad she brought that up. A few months ago, a grant from UMCOR, the United Methodist Committee on Relief, actually allowed me to become part of the construction team. So now I'm working with them as a construction coordinator. I do assessments with the construction manager, help with that. I also help Bree and her team identify what may be volunteer opportunities when we look at these assessments on these homes. I call contractors, inspectors, but I also am always looking. Bree is usually on site when we're doing assessment and we're having conversations on which things might be a volunteer opportunity. Once the project starts, how far out that opportunity might be and just how that may look to get those volunteers in. Again, really, it's a matter of getting volunteers and spreading the more volunteers we have on site, that money that's been donated for these projects can spread farther through the community. So we work together on that. So what you should expect on site, and that's really what I wanted to discuss. It seems like a lot of people, and we get this through Habitat, we've had a lot of it through the flood recovery volunteerism. People think that in volunteering that they have to have a construction background of some sort or know how to use all these tools, and that's really not the case. When you come to site, first things first, we'll usually have a conversation of what the day is going to look like, but also what the safety protocol is for what project you're going to be doing. If you're going to be on a ladder or you're going to have somebody that might be working overhead as their hard hats, how to use a ladder. But basically, COVID conversations, how we expect to keep people safe on site. But the first part is that we would assign an appropriate project for your skill. We don't expect anybody ever to do anything that they're not comfortable with. We don't just hand out tools and people are running power saws or miter saws or nail guns. If they're not comfortable with heights, we don't expect anybody to do anything in that manner. We want them to be comfortable on site. We want them to be safe, and we'd never expect anybody to do something that they didn't want to do. That said, A lot of times we get people that are brand new and come out and want to do work and are happy to like, hey, I'd like to use this tool. When we do that, they'll receive the proper training on that tool. There'll be somebody who's most likely myself or Bree or somebody that is a team leader that's on site. Habitat has crew leaders. So we'll make sure that person who is volunteering gets the training on whatever tool they're with. And usually there's a group of us, so we're all working together. I always tell in any safety meeting with volunteers, we are all a team, and be free to use your voice. If you see something that looks unsafe, tell us. We want everybody to go home happy, healthy, feel that they've done a good thing for the community. And that always, ideally bring them back because they had a good enough time helping the community. So that involves safety at all times. Then you'd receive your job description and assignment that is appropriate, which may be anything, as Bree mentioned. It could be yard cleanup. It could be, we've had them help us with insulation. We've had them help us with paint. I've had them help with some framing. I mean, it really depends on what is going on a project at a certain time. As Bree mentioned, we'd sometimes have large groups. Sometimes there's a group of 3 or 4 people that come out and just help with something that might take 3 or 4 hours. So every hour of anybody's volunteerism is important. There are projects that come up that we don't necessarily need a bunch of people, but a homeowner might need a hand. And if they're willing to come out and spend an hour or 2, we're absolutely happy with that as well. So you should expect to be treated as a fellow team member. We're going to treat you the same way we expect to be treated. We're going to treat you with respect. Again, it's about making sure that volunteers understand that we value the time that they're giving the community and our team to be able to help us. We cannot do anything without them. I always tell volunteers, without you, I really have no job, or I'm a one-man team and I'm not going to get as much done. So we try to make sure that everybody feels a part of the team and understands what their impact really is in the community. We try to be a good steward of your time, which Bree knows it can be very tough. I mean, schedules and construction change as to weather, contractors' time, so it can be really tough. But we try to make sure that when you come out to site, projects are ready to go. You have what you need. You're just going to get there, get instruction, and get moving, so that you don't feel like you're standing around or that your time wasn't valued. So you should always expect that. We'll always give you the appreciation. Usually, and I know Bree is the same way. I enjoy having the volunteers on site. I enjoy talking to them and learning about them and explaining, what we're doing with the families and how the construction's going and those sorts of things. We expect that you'll be treated with a spirit of friendliness and cooperation. We want to continue to be a great place for you to volunteer and spend your time. It'll be, again, as safety is always safe and inviting environment for everyone that comes on the site. Habitat and the long-term flood recovery cannot do what we do without volunteerism. There's a lot of work to be done. This is a major undertaking. When we talk past, present, and future, we expect this to go on. We are still identifying projects. I'm still doing assessments. We're, a year and a half away or farther, and we're still assessing homes. There's people that were out there that were trying to do things on their own, and now we're realizing that they just need some help. And, we're there to help them get those volunteers to be able to help these people. And another thing I like to mention is the difference that volunteers make. Our teams quite often work with these families from beginning to end. So we meet the family, we create a relationship with these families, we see them move back in, and we actually get to see sometimes after they've been in for a while what the difference it makes for a family and the community. It takes a lot of, there's a lot of mental and physical demanding things on a homeowner that doesn't have a safe or comfortable place to live. Some of these have been out of their home for a year plus. They're trying to figure out how they're going to take care of things, even if they're in their home. I know Bree identifies a lot of yard work that there's just so much in there that a homeowner's overwhelmed. So mentally and physically, it creates a lot of stress, not just for the homeowner and the parents, but for children. And really, the difference that a volunteer makes, they don't usually ever get to see. But it is amazing the transformation of a family that has gone through something this devastating to getting them back into the home, and then they're able to thrive and feel safe and feel at home again, you know. And I try to make sure that volunteers understand what that impact is. Like I say, they come out, they work for a few hours. It's a great thing. They feel good that they've done something for the community, but what they've done overall, I don't think they ever get to really understand what that impact is. And so I always like to mention that. Again, we're still identifying projects. We will still need volunteers in the future. We're hoping that they'll be willing to dedicate some more time, and we'll find those projects for those volunteers to come out and work on site and make those differences in the community. Any questions from anyone?
Thanks, Eric. I do have some questions.
Okay.
So if I'm a volunteer that has an hour, or someone that has an hour to give, how do I go about, and Bree, you can chime in here too if you want, how do I go about signing up for an opportunity to volunteer? I
think so. Really, it's going to be to contact Bree. Bree, on your end, you probably have a better idea of how you are identifying or how people are calling into you. We get for Habitat, people call in and ask for times. We give them a schedule of what projects we have. And those are as well, those are, like I said, with United Way, they are flood recovery projects. I'm working with, we've done 2, and I'm in the middle of 2 more right now that Bree has helped identify volunteers, as well as our office, because now we're able to have volunteers. But for us, it's just a matter of contacting our affiliate and saying you're willing to give your time, and we will plug that time in somewhere to get work done.
From my standpoint, we have a website that's volunteerglbr.org, and that is a website that shows the needs of the community at large in a regional scope. And so not just United Way, but any of our nonprofit, local nonprofit agencies can list volunteer opportunities on this website. Now, if you're looking for something specifically flood recovery, you'll be able to see opportunities listed on there. One would be general assistance. So that one we do every Thursday, and we'll connect you with the most relevant need at that time. So whether that be painting or lawn maintenance, whatever the need is for that Thursday of that week is the project that you would be working on. You'll also find registration for our fall cleanup events or any other large event that is available, and our water distribution for Gladwin. So that is the way that you can really get connected with those opportunities, and those do connect back with Habitat flood recovery needs as well.
Thank you both. Is there a certain age requirement for volunteers?
On my end, on Habitat's end, there is. We will take younger people once in a while. So we've worked with the Boy Scouts at times. Usually, if you're going to be on site for construction where you're getting on ladders, any heights, any tools, 18 years old. But we have identified projects like landscaping, helping families that need, basically raking or those sorts of things. We have used younger people for those sorts of things.
For us, pretty much the same. However, we do take individuals around the age of 16 as well for things that are not necessarily construction related. We will use them for painting. So if you're 16 and and want to come paint, we will certainly connect you with that. But when you're thinking about the flood recovery rebuild needs, that would probably be the only one that we would connect minors with, simply from a safety standpoint. But there are other ways that they can contribute, whether that be looking at our local partner agencies to see what opportunities they have available for minors, because they help our flood survivors in an indirect way by making sure that they still have, their food, clothing, and other types of needs met from more of a long-term standpoint. That would definitely be a way to get some of our younger audiences engaged.
Thank you. So I think, I really appreciated the perspective that you both shared, and really the main commonality here is the fact that there is still very much a need out there, and it might look different depending on what flood survivor we're working with and how we're working with them, but there's still very much a need. And so we encourage you to share the opportunities with your friends and neighbors and colleagues, and just raise your hand and say, hey, I'm interested in giving my time and talent in some way. And Bree and Eric can really work to plug you in with the areas that are best suited for what you have opportunities to serve on. Bree, was there something else you wanted to add?
Nope, I think I just accidentally unmuted.
Okay. Well, I really appreciate the time that you guys gave and just all of the work that you're doing. I know many times in your roles, you have to jump in when someone isn't able to show up, or, you're at pretty much every job site introducing and going through all of the different protocols and whatnot. And so we appreciate you taking the time to spend with us today. And I just want to encourage everyone to, if you know of someone that still is going through the process of flood recovery, if they have not reached out to disaster case managers yet, to do that. And they can call 989-374-8000. Also, calling 211 is a great place to start. They're really the one-stop shop for connecting people with different resources that are out there based on the different needs that individuals have. So that just calling 211 is always a great resource as well, and visiting the reliefmidland.org website. And then, as Bree mentioned too, if you want to raise your hand to volunteer, please visit the Midland County United Way website, and there's a volunteer link on there where you can see all the different opportunities, or just reach out to connect with Bree and her volunteer team. Just a heads up that we have our next, and actually it's going to be kind of a broad overview of long-term disaster recovery as a whole. We'll be wrapping up these calls in total, but really talking about the full breadth of where we were and where we are and where we're going. And so that call is on October 14th at 10:30 a.m. Again, we ask that you register in advance using the same link that you used to register for this call. And as always, feel free to reach out if there's anything that you need from us, but we appreciate you taking the time. And thank you, Eric and Bree, for your informative presentation today. I hope you guys all have a great rest of your day. Stay safe.